So, hi all, my name's Camilla. I'm the Engagement Officer with the On-Farm Carbon Advice Team with the New South Wales DPIRD. Today we are with Graeme Schwenke talking about nitrogen efficiency. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the lands and waters in which we gather today. I'm on Wiradjuri country based near Orange, and recognise their continuing connection to the land, water and community. We pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Indigenous peoples here today. Would everyone please access the chat and tell us where you're all from? That would be great, so we know who we're talking to. So today's session will be recorded. It will be available on our website, and that link will be shared hopefully by the end of the week. There will be an opportunity for questions at the end of the presentation, but please feel free to put any questions in the chat as we go through. At the end of the webinar, there will be a short survey for any feedback about the content in the webinar and the rest of the series as well. So I'd like to just do a general disclaimer. So the information in this presentation is general in nature and is accurate as of the time of presenting. Please seek any independent advice that would fit with your personal circumstances. Any reference to specific products or services or organisations is provided for illustrative purposes only and does not imply or endorse or is a recommendation by the New South Wales Government or DPIRD. Okay, so without further ado, let me introduce Dr. Graeme Schwenke, who is Senior Research Scientist with the New South Wales DPIRD Soils Team based at Tamworth. Graeme has over 20 years experience both in Australia and abroad, and today Graeme will be discussing the ins and outs of nitrogen management. He will be presenting the 4 R's of nutrient stewardship and explain enhanced efficiency fertilisers. Fabulous. Over to you, Graeme.
Thanks, Camilla. So yes, I'm based at Tamworth. My research focuses on nitrogen cycling and losses in dry land and irrigated cropping systems. Over the past 25 years, my work has occasionally included the use of modified nitrogen release products, but this has now become a focus of a current grains research project that I'm involved in, which is led by the University of Melbourne. So this presentation today, rather than focus on my own work, which is mostly applicable to my region, it's more of a general talk and it's not intended to be an endorsement or a disendorsement of any particular products. Okay, let's get into it. So we're going to talk a lot, or predominantly, about enhanced efficiency fertilisers, or EEFs. Where this comes into play is that often in agriculture there's excess available nitrogen in the soil, which may be subject to loss processes, and the excess is often the case where we're using typical nitrogen fertilisers that have a very simple chemical makeup and are readily soluble, so that the N that they provide is almost all available very soon after application. So if we're applying a lot to the soil, especially before the plants can use it, some of this may be lost. These losses can be expensive and can result in pollution in the environment. The losses can occur either before, during, or even after the crop growing season. And after the season's a period of time often not considered when we're doing calculations of nitrogen use efficiency, but it is still important. So where EEFs come in, enhanced efficiency fertilisers, is that they're aiming to reduce these nitrogen losses. And that may result in us being able to use a reduced nitrogen rates, or we might be able to increase yields. There's basically 4 main classes of EEFs. There's urease inhibitors, there's nitrification inhibitors. There are also dual inhibitors, which are a combination of both of the previous types of inhibitors. And there's also controlled release fertilisers. These are the 4 main categories. Where do EEFs fit with the 4 R's of nutrient stewardship that I hope you're all familiar with? So the 4 R's are the right product, where we're trying to match the nutrient source to the crop's need. So when we're thinking about this, we think, is an enhanced product a better option in our environment, in our situation? We're also thinking about the right rate, the second of the R's. Matching that rate to the rate of fertiliser to the crop's needs is important, and in I guess current situations where losses may be occurring, often that rate is increased to take account of the losses and incorporate those losses. So using an EEF that plugs that leak should potentially mean less fertiliser can be applied for the same result, or maybe better. The third R is the right timing, making those nutrients available when the crop needs them. So some of these enhanced products have different patterns of nitrogen release, and these may suit the crop's needs better, may also suit the logistics of farm operations better. And the right placement. So putting the nutrients when and where the crop can best use them. Using an EF, as mentioned before, can change your options for how and where the nitrogen's applied and help in logistics. Here's, I think we can't really go past looking at the nitrogen cycle, because we need to understand where these efficiency fertilisers fit in. So here's a basic nitrogen cycle diagram showing the natural inputs of nitrogen to the soil. I guess the point to stress is that the plant's taking up the nitrogen from these pools of ammonium or nitrate, and the nitrogen enters from the air through fixation or a biological fixation or atmospheric fixation into those pools, and then the crop can take them up. And there's some sort of closed loops inside as well, where some of these types of nitrogen can be immobilised for periods of time, but are re-released again. So, however, once we bring crop removal into play, then we're taking nitrogen out of that system, and quite often we need extra inputs to provide enough for a good crop uptake and economic production. So that's where our fertilisers come in. We're adding either to the ammonium pool or directly, or to the nitrate pool directly. So it's starting to look a bit complicated, but we haven't actually considered losses yet, the loss pathways. So where do they fit in? Well, these are I guess the most predominant loss pathways include nitrogen volatilisation or ammonia volatilisation. And that's that's coming out of that ammonium pool in the soil. We also have nitrate leaching, and the nitrate can also be lost through denitrification. So just a point to note that both of these avenues of loss are affected by generally overly wet conditions, as is erosion and runoff. And also to note that nitrification itself, an internal process in the soil, does create some of the gaseous losses as well. So the denitrification creates these gas losses. We're going to talk about that a bit more. But where do the enhanced efficiency fertilisers fit in? A urease inhibitor, we said the first class, that's basically stopping this process of conversion of urea through to ammonium for a period of time. The second class is the nitrification inhibitors, and they work by, whoops, I went too far. They work by stopping this process of nitrification, which is the conversion of ammonium through to nitrate, again, for a period of time. And then you have the dual inhibitors, which are basically doing both of those things in the soil, affecting both of those processes. And we have the controlled release, where we're really trying to just slow down the release of nitrogen from these different fertiliser products. So let's go through them one at a time. First of all, the urease inhibitor. Where does it fit? So we mentioned that it's to do with ammonia volatilisation. So this is a situation where there's an inhibitor is basically targeting one specific process, ammonia volatilization. But it's targeting, even though volatilization comes from ammonium, can come from the plant residues and even the plants themselves, we're really targeting the ammonia volatilization that happens when we're applying urea. And this is a fairly complex process that are affected by many parameters of soil and weather that determine how much and whether this will occur. And basically that's another webinar all on its own. So I've put a reference down the bottom there to a paper that I've presented in the past where a lot of those details are covered. So we've got this urease inhibitor that's basically stopping the urea getting through to the ammonium form, keeping it in the urea form for a period of time. So why are we interested in ammonia? Why do we want to stop ammonia being lost? Well, first of all, it's a big loss to our economic situation if we're buying fertiliser and it's going off into the air. But ammonia, or NH3, is also an indirect contributor to greenhouse gas emissions, as that ammonia, once it's in the air, is deposited somewhere else. It may be meters away or it may be hundreds of kilometres away. The ammonia, once it's in the air, before it's deposited, does combine with rain and dust and other airborne chemicals. And some of these combinations can lead to pollution, such as acid rain and particulate salt particles that are linked to respiratory and cardiovascular diseases in humans. And shown on the right here is a world map of where some of the more concentrated areas of ammonia in the atmosphere have been identified. Basically, the image shows that these high concentrations emanate from agriculture, particularly feedlots, but also from mining and chemical manufacturing industries, including fertiliser manufacturing. So ammonia volatilization with being countered by urease inhibitors. The urease inhibitors can be applied with urea. They can be either coated onto the urea or actually included in the urea as it's being made, or it can be mixed with a solution of UAN before it's being applied. An important aspect of this is that the coating should be done evenly to get the best result. The urease inhibitors that are currently in use, particularly in Australia, is mostly the first one listed here, NBPT, which is an acronym for a long chemical name. And here's a picture of it if you want to see what it looks like. But there are many other compounds that have been identified as urease inhibitors. There's been testing on over 10,000 elements, and compounds have been tested for their ability to inhibit urease. But really the main commercial one since the 1990s has been NBPT. Some of the other ones that I've listed there are available overseas. I think perhaps ammonium thiosulfate may be available in Australia. The fertilisers sold with these inhibitors often contain other additives, such as colour dyes, but also solvents and other stabilisers to try and extend their shelf life. Yeah, so there's lots out there, but really this is the main one that's been used. When to use it? So basically, the idea is that it's trying to prevent ammonia volatilization, which occurs when the ammonia is produced at the soil surface or even above it. So it's particularly useful when you are broadcasting fertilizer, broadcasting urea fertilizer. If you're drilling it directly into the soil, then, or you're irrigating straight after you're applying it by broadcast, then there's not a lot of need to do it because the drilling or the irrigation will get it into the soil where it will be safe from that volatilization loss. An interesting point to note that nowadays in some countries such as Germany, the use of a urease inhibitor is mandatory if urea is being broadcast. I guess you really want to have it if you're broadcasting and there's no, it's not certain whether the follow-up rainfall will occur. or if your soil surface that you're broadcasting on is covered in some way, whether it be with thick stubble or pasture thatch layers. How to use it? I guess a couple of notes. Take particular note of the shelf life because it is limited. And as I said, it can be affected by some of these additives. So read the label carefully and the use by date. Once it's applied, its activity degrades in soil. So it's only active for a short period of time. You can apply it with higher rates to reduce losses more, but that costs more. So it's generally not the case. And safety and hygiene considerations are important. Studies have not found it to be persistent in the soil over longer periods of time or in surface or groundwaters. And it's not considered, NBPT, not considered to be toxic at levels typically present in fertilisers, but the concentrate is and should be handled carefully and accordingly. I think it's worthy to note that in the recent articles that I've read from the German Environment Agency, they noted that several of the urease inhibitors approved for sale there, not the ones in use in Australia, would likely not be approved under their plant protection regulations due to some of their toxicity concerns. To my knowledge, these compounds are not currently sold in Australia, but I guess it's a cautionary note to take note of. As far as I know, Australia has no regulation on the use of these inhibitors. So I think being careful is the best policy and handling safely and following the label. And a final point, which covers this inhibitor and the other ones that I'll be talking about, avoid cross-contamination with produce. So it's important if you're using trucks to bring in bulk fertiliser that's coated with these inhibitors that you not only sweep them but wash them out thoroughly. We don't want to end up with any potential issues of chemical contamination of produce from the trucks being used for the two purposes. So urease inhibitors, what does the research say about these? So I'd like to credit the study that's provided this diagram and some others like it that I'll be presenting later, which has come out of the University of Melbourne. It's an excellent way to summarise a vast body of research that's been done worldwide over several decades. So what this diagram is showing, green is good and red not so good. This is showing what impact urease inhibitors have on, first of all, ammonia emissions, which is what we've talked about so far, but also nitrous oxide emissions, which we will be talking about, and potentially leaching and runoff, although there's no data here for those two. And what is shown on this graph, each symbol represents the average of one particular group of studies. So this is actually a grouping of lots of groupings of studies. So it's an excellent summary overall. So each group of studies has been done in a specific type of landscape, cropland or grasslands, for example, and done by different authors at different times, summarising all the data that they could find in what are called meta-analyses. So if the line going through the point crosses the zero line, then that study's results are considered not significantly different from nothing happening. And as you can see, all of the urease inhibitors have shown a good result for reducing ammonia emissions. So the effect on N loss is negative. And you can see the effect on nitrous oxide emissions. Some of the studies found that a good result, but a lot of the other studies found there was really no difference from nothing happening overall. I should also note that most of these studies have been done with NBPT because it's been around the longest. Globally, its impact tends to average out at about 50% reduction in loss. So, for example, if the urea that you put out would have lost 20% from ammonia volatilisation and you use this urease inhibitor with it, your average reduction being 50% would bring this down to 10% instead of 20%. Impact on crop yields is averaged as well through some of these meta-analysis studies to around about 6% increase in yield, but the range is from 0 to 10% in that meta-analysis, which is listed in the reference at the bottom there. So how best to apply these things? Obviously, they're aimed at broadcasting. So now we've given a green light to broadcasting. And in terms of drilling, I've given it a red light because there's no real point. The whole idea is to keep it stable until you can get it into the soil. So if you're drilling it into the soil, there's really no point to use it. Okay, let's get into nitrification inhibitors. Where are they useful? So if we get back to our diagram, we've got nitrate leaching happening. We've got denitrification potentially happening. We've got nitrification always happening because that's just a natural process that's always occurring. As I mentioned earlier, the nitrate leaching and the denitrification processes tend to happen in more extreme conditions, particularly waterlogging events or high rainfall events. And I've highlighted here that nitrous oxide is one of the products from the nitrification process as well. So we've got to, yes, so in nitrification inhibitors, what they're essentially doing are slowing the flow from ammonium that we've put in through our fertilizers through to nitrate. So basically just reducing the pool of nitrate sitting in the soil. Leaching, I guess, is important because we want to obviously avoid putting excessive fertilizer when there's no plants present, and it may leach through the soil. The nitrate is particularly mobile. Other forms of nitrogen can leach as well, but particularly urea, but also some more forms of organic and ammonium much less mobile and less likely to leach. But sometimes we're talking about runoff as well, particularly in irrigated situations, and all of these forms can run off to some extent. Yep, so it's nitrate. Nitrate leach may still be reached, so it may leach out of reach of one crop, but potentially deeper crops may be able to scavenge some of that nitrate back in future seasons. Nitrate in water does indirectly contribute to greenhouse gas emissions because it's going somewhere else, and therefore it may be subject to the process of denitrification that gives off that nitrous oxide. And of course, nitrate affects aquatic systems and potentially human health if it's in our groundwater. So that's leaching. The nitrification inhibitor is also important for denitrification. Denitrification, as I said, tends to happen when the oxygen supply is very low, so in waterlogged conditions, essentially. But you also need a fair amount of nitrate there and a supply of labile carbon. When you've got all of this, you get these three gases being lost. The losses can be very large, can be medium, or they can be low if you don't have those specific conditions. But once those conditions occur and those denitrification gases are produced, they're not coming back. So unlike ammonia, they're not deposited back to the soil in a way that crops can get a go at them. In terms of overall losses in dryland drains, a recent survey found that they range from about 0 to 54%, with an average around 28% denitrification loss of those three gases in total. Can you change some of the conditions that might be causing denitrification to occur? If you can reduce the potential for waterlogging, improve drainage, reduce compaction, they can contribute to that. We've mentioned nitrous oxide a few times. It needs a special Guernsey here because it's a greenhouse gas, which is potentially up to 300 times the global warming potential of carbon dioxide, and it also depletes ozone in the upper stratosphere. And it's increased by 20% since 1800, as you can see, and it's still going up. And a lot of that is due to use of fertilisers in agriculture. So nitrous oxide is important. We tend to harp on about it when we talk about nitrification inhibitors, but it is one of 3 gases, and the other 2 gases are also important, particularly from the point of the dinitrogen gas, which tends to be a much bigger proportion of the overall loss. But it's hard to measure, and nitrous oxide not as hard to measure, so a lot of the data we have on it comes from nitrous oxide emissions. So what are the nitrification inhibitors? Again, there's various chemical compounds that are abbreviated for brevity, and most of these are synthetically created, but there are biological ones available. Neem is used on all urea that's applied in India. It has a nitrification inhibition properties. There are also other bioinhibitors known about, but not necessarily commercially available. Nitrification inhibitors are typically applied either with urea, UAN, or can be mixed directly with anhydrous ammonia when it's being applied. When to use it, it's, you want to basically try and slow that supply through to nitrate before the crop is there ready to access the nitrate for its growth. So if you're pre-applying nitrogen, that's the time you might consider using it. If there's a long period of time between pre-application and when the crop's even planted, for example, or even at planting, you've got a period of time before it's likely to be taken up. How to use it? Ideally, you'd be able to reduce the actual nitrogen rate that you're used to applying, but if you're not sure, try some test strips on this first. But basically, also try and avoid situations that might lead to runoff. The chemicals used in these inhibitors are much more persistent than the NBPT we mentioned before, and we want to avoid them ending up in waterways and groundwater. So in terms of safety and hygiene, yes, I've mentioned persistence. So these chemicals need to persist to actually work, and we've got data from our own work that's shown that they can persist for several months in the soil, but you don't want them to persist forever so that they end up in groundwater or streams or even accumulating in the food chain. And there are some overseas studies looking at monitoring in the environment where some of these chemicals have been found to be persisting in the environment and ending up in water sources as well. Some of the chemicals used may be volatile, so they need to be injected into the soil so that they don't end up in the air. And obviously, they're chemicals that are designed to inhibit microbial, specific microbial activity, so they will obviously have some effect on the microbial diversity in the soils. There's some questions as to whether their repeated use could lead to resistance. There's no evidence for this at all, but it's a question that needs to be asked based on, I guess, experiences with other ag chemicals. Some of these inhibitor chemicals are considered toxic to aquatic organisms, plants, and even humans. So again, be very careful in how they're used. I think generally we need more toxicology studies and environmental monitoring on these. Once again, Australia doesn't have any regulations on their use. So what does the research say? If we look at the same diagram, same type of diagram, lots more studies. This time we're looking at nitrification inhibitors. What effects do they have on ammonia emissions? So we're looking at them mostly in terms of denitrification, which is releasing nitrous oxide. They're in the green zone for that. They're all of the studies are showing good results for that, but not all of them are showing, well, some of them are actually showing poor results in terms of ammonia emission. And if you think about that, that may be because you've stopped that flow of nitrogen from, or that transformation of nitrogen from ammonium through to nitrates. Therefore, you're keeping more of the nitrogen that's applied in an ammonium form, which may be subject to some losses as ammonia volatilization. So they're not really doing the job there, but that's not the job that they're aiming for. They're really aiming for denitrification and, of course, leaching as well. So they get a tick for both of those and runoff from these studies as well. So my take on that was, you shouldn't be broadcasting these, because if they're sitting on the surface and they're keeping it as ammonium, you're more likely to lose it as ammonia volatilization. So looking at getting those into the ground. Dual inhibitors, where you're combining both of the two that I've just talked about, probably a lot less known about them because they haven't been around for as long. There's less studies. Here we've got our diagram with all of our losses showing up. The dual inhibitors, just a reminder, they're inhibiting the urease enzyme, so we're stopping urea getting to ammonium. We're also stopping that ammonium getting to nitrate, so we're sort of slowing the whole process down in different ways. What does the research say on those? You can see there's fewer studies, or fewer collections of studies, I should say, but it's a positive outcome here in that these studies are showing that the dual inhibitors are doing the job both for ammonia emissions and nitrous oxide emissions as our surrogate indicator of denitrification, and even in leaching as well. So fix there, although there's one group of studies not so positive for that. Yeah, so as opposed to the nitrification inhibitors, which I said not designed for broadcast, these ones are, because they've got that ammonia emission inhibition aspect to them. So if you've got something that's designed for broadcast, then there's no real point to be drilling those into the soil. And our last category, controlled release fertilizers. Here's our diagram once again. Where do they fit? Well, they're basically just slowing down the entrance of nitrogen from our fertilizers into the soil pools. And so that slows everything down and therefore can affect leaching, can affect denitrification as well. Controlled release fertilizers, often they tend to be a system of the nutrient being encapsulated in either a polymer coating or a sulfur coating or a bio oil or polysaccharides, or there's a long list of things that have been tried to encapsulate these, encapsulate normal soluble fertilizers to make them release the nutrients in a much slower manner. And they tend to be categorized by the amount of time that it takes to release a given amount of nitrogen from the inside of the capsule. And that's generally around about the 80%. So how long it takes to release 80%. So some of the products may take 45 days or 90 days or up to 270 days of some. And this release it can be altered by microbial activity in the case of some types of these controlled release, but also temperature and moisture and pH. The impact on greenhouse gas emissions varies with the product and how it's being used. Yes, so it can be coating various things like urea, but also your ammonium phosphate type fertilizers as well. When to use it, if you're applying urea or other forms of N, particularly pre-season, and you want to basically get it in at a certain time, but you don't want it all to be released until really the crop's starting to slowly take it up. And in some cases, this can be well before the cropping season starts. And you may use them for a logistical reason, such as you don't want to don't want to have to get into the paddock to put top-up applications of N fertilizer. Some of these have been used in blends with just sort of straight urea or straight nitrogen fertilizers, so that a portion is available straight away and the rest is available in a more slow release fashion. They tend to be used a lot more in horticultural industries, as the cost is a fair bit higher. How to use them? Yes, so drilling into the soil tends to give you a more even environment to control their release. Although there has been some issues found when they're applying in bands compared to broadcast as well. And safety and hygiene considerations are similar to the previous classes, except I guess one additional one is that some of the polymers that are used or have been used may constitute microplastics in the soil if they're non-biodegradable and they persist for long periods of time. So that's a concern in terms of, are they entering groundwater or streams, or even potentially accumulating in the food chain? I think there's just not enough known of those issues as yet. So I guess if there's a biodegradable option available, I suggest considering that as well, alternatively. So what's the research say? Again, our diagram here has put most of these in very positive light for the reducing ammonia emissions and nitrous oxide emissions in the main, and also nitrogen leaching also reduced. So a mixture of positive responses, or some of them, but not showing any difference. So okay, I thought, well, as I said, how to apply a broadcast, that's probably a maybe rather than a yes or a no. Probably, yeah, there's, I would tend to go more towards the drill aspect of that, for that, getting the more standardized conditions there. And so just to summarize all of that up, we've got our urease inhibitors, nitrification, dual and control release. We've got the Graeme's recommendations for how they might be applied, and just a couple of the main points to reconsider. Think about the shelf life of your urease inhibitors and coating them evenly. They're proven as effective in reducing ammonia loss. They're short-lived in soil. And nitrification inhibitors, not designed for ammonia loss per se. They're designed to slow the nitrate supply in the soil, and they're shown to reduce nitrate leaching and nitrous oxide losses. Think about what your loss situation is likely to be as to whether you need them or not. The dual inhibitors combine, I guess, the best of those two. They're reducing both ammonia and slowing nitrate supply. There's less research on them available at the moment. And our control release, they're basically, just releasing that N more slowly from the fertilizer, trying to match what the crops, the rate with the crop demand, rate of release with the crop demand. And they can be quite useful for improving logistics in operations, and choose biodegradable if you can. And a couple of final comments that go across all of these is practice that good hygiene and handling, clean out the trucks that are used for transporting. I think we need more toxicology research and more monitoring in the environment, as there seems to be some real potential hazards with using, and potential for where they might end up in the environment. So to summarize all of that, hopefully, protect yourself, handle chemicals with care, and follow the label regarding the safety precautions of the chemicals, the active ingredients in them, as if it was any other sort of pharmaceutical. Protect our soil. So where you can, choose less persistent or less toxic options if they're available. Protect your business. So choose fertiliser types, methods and rates that will minimise your losses, particularly into the environment. Off-site impacts are not always felt directly, but they add up in the atmosphere and other places in the environment. In terms of business, there's really no efficiency gains from using these inhibitors if the N's already in oversupply, and we've shown that in a number of studies over the years. If there's lots of N, you might save some of the loss, but if there's still lots of N, you're not going to see it in the so getting the nitrogen rate right, one of those key 4 R's. Protect your business and protect your industry. So practice your best management practice hygiene when you're transporting and using fertilisers with these chemicals coating on them. Avoid conditions where applying them could lead to direct off-site effects. And protect our planet. If you can choose options that minimise nitrous oxide emissions or ammonia emissions and minimise pollution of ground and surface waters. Thank you.
We might leave it there if that's okay. We're 5 minutes to 2. So I just wanted to say thank you for those remaining, for staying on and coming to our webinar series. A big thank you to Dr. Graeme Schwenke for his comprehensive presentation and all the time taken to present to us all. I've put the survey in the chat. If you'd love to give us some feedback, we'd love to take it. So if you could fill that in for us. And I'd also like to say a big thank you to Fertiliser Australia and the Soil Network of Knowledge for helping to promote this webinar. This will be recorded and I will send out the link later in the week or early next week. But thank you so much for all your time and coming along today.
Thanks, everybody.